all around the world. Malapit na ma-circumnavigate po ang mundo ng iyong ano, paboritong presidente, di ba? Mamaya na tayo dun sa Magellan Jr. ulit, yung mga latest updates sa Davos Summit sa Switzerland, among others. Of course, yun yung focus natin, pressing Sibuyas. Tapos kahapon, pinag-usapan natin, of course, si Senator Tulfo and prospects for the 2028 elections. Today naman, mga kameta, of course, kailangan natin pag-usapan itong big news of the day. Boom! Booyaka siya! Kamusta na dyan, mga ano? Tatay left the chat room. Ayan. Dami na trigger dyan. Hindi, kamusta na dyan? Kamusta na dyan, mga ano natin? Mga tatay, katatay na talagang desididong-desidido na tama sila, na talagang sa kanila ang yung punto ng hustisya, blah blah blah. Okay, so today guys, it's formal na-quit na po si Maria Ressa, ang CEO po at founder ng Rappler News Agency, dun sa charges of tax evasion na sinampa sa kanya sa ilalim ng dating administration. So this decision was handed by the Courts of Appeals, which deals with the specific cases of taxes. Pag-usapan natin ng mabuti yan, mga kameta. But clearly, there is a whiff of change. At least may konting mga indications that perhaps things are really moving in the right directions as far as our democracy is concerned, as far as freedom of expression is concerned. By the way, of course, this is not the end of the story. There are still other cases that Maria Ressa has to deal with, in fact, even more serious cases. But the hope is that things have now been set in the right direction, that things are set in a certain kind of motion that will, in the hopes of many people, will lead to the acquittal of Maria Ressa on other charges also filed against her by the previous administration. But many are also saying, what about some other important figures who also fought against excesses of the previous administration? And of course, kasama dyan ang dating Senator Laila de Lima, also the former chief of the Commission of Human Rights of the Philippines, among the, if not the fiercest critic of former President Rodrigo Duterte. So ang tanong din ngayon is what will happen naman kay De Lima, Senator De Lima. Is Senator De Lima the next when it comes to acquittal? When it comes to making sure na truth speaks, that justice prevails, and that yung mga kaewanan, mga fake cases, mga politically motivated charges na yan will hopefully eventually be discarded. Now, before going to the case of Maria Ressa and talking about the other cases also against her and what is the path ahead, also discussing the case of Senator De Lima, let me first say that we are in an interesting phase in Philippine politics. Because on the surface, the expectation was that sa ilalim ni Marcos Jr., there'll be more of a continuation of, if not intensification of, yung mga certain trend lines na nakita natin sa ilalim ng dating presidente natin si Duterte. I kind of diverge with a number of colleagues and peers who were in this panic mode and said, and with Marcos Jr., everything is going to go crazy and supposedly we're going to have another martial law. And I said, no, I'm not very sure about that. Because if you look at Marcos Jr., he seems to have very different ideas, not only vis-a-vis his father, but also vis-a-vis tatay. Diba? And clearly, when it comes to Marcos Jr., he's very, very interested in, as he put it, to reintroduce the country. Nasaan siya ngayon? Hindi siya nandito yata, di ba? Nasa Davos pa rin. Consistently, he's going abroad. Consistently, he's trying to rebrand the Philippines. Consistently, he's trying to fully rehabilitate, of course, the Marcoses in the international community, no? And of course, to pave the way for the next generation to have a much easier political situation than what they have had throughout the past decades or so. So that's why I was cautiously optimistic that we might see a whiff of change, or hopefully more than just a whiff of change, under the current administrations. Not necessarily expecting that the current administration will necessarily be, let's say, progressive, democratic, liberal democratic. Not necessarily that, but at least in terms of correction of some of the excesses of the previous administration on a number of issues. We clearly see that correction happening when it comes to our relations with our Western partners, sa relasyon natin sa China, nakikita natin, and with Russia, there's further correction of that. Doon sa war drugs, at least we have seen many good indications that at least itong kasalukuyan administration, ayaw nila yung bara-bara style, they're much more concerned about mitigating extrajudicial killings and other abuses of power in the conduct of counter-narcotics operations, among others. So we clearly see a whiff of change, if not a little bit more than a whiff of change. And then, nakita din natin earlier this month that there was this very important ruling by the Supreme Court, no, kung saan the Joint Maritime Seismic Undertaking, diniscuss natin yan mga kameta, look at our vlogs a few days back. The JMSU, the Joint Maritime Seismic Undertaking, signed between Arroyo administration and China and Vietnam, but particularly vis-a-vis China, that was struck down as unconstitutional after more than 10 years of lingering there in the courts. No, so for me, the timing was very important because this came very close to yung pagbisita ni Pangulong Marcos to China. It is also very important because it sets a very important precedence that makes it very difficult for the next presidents, or any president for that matter, to violate the Constitution in the name of building better relationship with China, or to i-compromise yung ating mga interest dyan sa West Philippine Sea in the name of building a better relationship with China. So that precedence was very important. And for me, it also showed that the Supreme Court can and should, of course, exercise this kind of guardrail role as far as our democracy is concerned, as far as our national interest is concerned. Because let's be honest, there have been a lot of criticism against our judiciary and our Supreme Court throughout the years. I'm not going to essentially adjudicate that those judgments or criticisms. Mahabang usapan yan. But the reality is that there have been certain concerns about how independent, how effective the judiciary has been in terms of checking the excesses of the other branches of the state, especially the presidential office, especially the executive. So that was a very important one. And then now you have this acquittal of Maria Ressa. But let's be very clear, mga kameta. Let's be very clear, mga kameta. We're only talking about, it's important, it's a big and important case, but we're talking about one out of four major cases, as far as Maria Ressa is concerned. So there are three other actually pending cases here, mga kameta, that we have to keep in mind. So, right, okay. So, let me just get down to this because, yes, I mean, of course, we are, many people are celebrating what's happening, but it's important that we put things into context, no? So, ang pinag-usapan natin dito yung tax evasion case laban sa kanya and how that was struck down. And since this is a criminal case filed against her, the charges were criminal, the threshold was really high for the prosecutor side, for the other side, no, to prove, beyond reasonable doubt that talagang there was an intentional, purpose of, violating our tax laws, etc. So they were not able to establish that, and therefore, dun sa appeals court, it was struck down. I'm just trying to get the exact wording here para. Okay, so Maria Ressa, of course, was very happy. She said today, facts win, truth wins, justice wins. She's very good in terms of coming out with those kinds of tagline, headline, etc. Now, so the Philippines Court of Tax Appeals, no? Ayon sa kanila, yung mga prosecutors failed to provide or prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt when it comes to tax evasion cases that was filed against her, no? Nonetheless, so we're looking at one important case, no? I'll post more about the details of that later on. So this is in relation to Rappler raising capital through some international partnerships and foreign investors. So ang kaso sa kanila was that there was certain income earned from those capital raised with foreign investors, and those incomes were taxable, and the tax should have been paid, and supposedly the tax was not paid. Therefore, this case was filed against her, to just make the case simple. So the foreign investors, Omidyar Network and North-based Media, had generated taxable income worth of 2.1 million pounds or $2.6 million ayon dun sa isang site. Ito yung Justice Department under the previous administration, and sabi nila hindi daw na-declare at hindi daw na So that was the circumstances of the case. But the court found that hindi na i-prove beyond reasonable doubt that there was any intention to avoid taxes, etc. So it was struck down. And in fairness to the Justice Secretary, the Department of Justice under the current administration at least, they said they're going to respect this. Now, this was, of course, welcome by many quarters. I'm not sure about the Tatay quarter, but the Philippine National Union of Journalists said the tax evasion case reflects an increasing use of law for reprisal and intimidation against journalists and civil society. Ito yung weaponization na sinasabi ko, weaponization of the law. So ayon sa kanya, while colleagues similar face legal challenges from libel to made-up terrorism charges in relation to their work, we take inspiration from this acquittal that if we stand up and hold the line, we can win. So clearly the hold the line, Maria Ressa kind of tagline. This is the inspiring a lot of people. We also saw very strong statements coming from different human rights related groups, Carlos Conde among others. But this is what we have to keep in mind, mga kameta, no? Uh, there are still other cases. Ito yung Rappler's appeal against the 2022 closure order laban sa Rappler. Hindi pa rin na-resolve yan. Meron din appeal by Miss Ressa and former rapper journalist Reynaldo Santos dun sa cyber libel. Yan, malaki yan. I think 6 years pa yan, if ever. So that's also a big case. If I'm not mistaken, this is with the Supreme Court. And there's also another tax evasion case or tax-related case filed also against Marquez and Rafa. So there are a number of other cases still there. So hindi pa tapos ang laban as far as freedom of expression, press freedom, and as far as, of course, Maria Ressa and her fate is concerned. Not to mention, of course, yung mga mas hindi ganong kakilala, no, journalists, including a former researcher and journalist with Rappler na si Reynaldo Santos Jr., who's also facing cyber libel cases. So these are serious cases, and let's see what the Supreme Court and other appeal courts are doing, or other courts are doing vis-a-vis these cases. So hindi pa tapos, no? Hindi pa tapos. Let's still see where this is going. Pero para sa akin, of course, there's a reason to hope that perhaps we'll see kind of a positive development also dun sa kaso laban kay Senator De Lima. Because I'll be very honest about this. As far as Senator De Lima is concerned, I think of all opposition or independent-minded figures in this country, I think she has suffered the most. Or I mean, come on, you're talking about years. How many years? 4 or 5 years na, di ba? And walang ebidensya. I mean, there's no real evidence whatsoever to talk about real evidence whatsoever. Yung mga witnesses nag-withdraw na, especially as soon as nawala na yung dating administration si Tatay. So, for me, I mean, she should have been nominated for Nobel Peace Prize, 2 at least, di ba? And I think she has a very good reason. She deserves to win that, precisely because of the degree of difficulty she has faced and the degree of, I don't know, man. I mean, pinag-usapan natin in the vlog last year, diba? Medyo na emotional pa tayo sa vlog na yan. But that's my, like, 4 or 5 years behind bars on really barely any real evidence. And with witnesses still withdrawing and still she being there, I mean, what's going on here, diba? So, hope ng iba dyan is at least we'll see finally some development on this front, good developments on this front, and hopefully there'll be also some sort of, at least for her supporters, some sort of acquittal on her front. Unless there's some really incontrovertible evidence that was not found all of these years, some real credible witness that was not found all these years, and then suddenly nag-pop up ngayon. Then, ibang usapan na yan, di ba? But that's not what we see, right? So we hope that there will also be some movement on that front, and our best wishes to our folks in the judiciary, among others, as they, execute their mandate as the guardrails of our democracy. All right? Maraming salamat. Thank you very much, mga kameta.